Okay, we're here, we're back. Hello everyone, we're playing some Mist URU Chronicles. I'm actually liking this a lot more than I thought I would. Downside is we got what looks to be a lot more reading to do this chapter. Holy shit, a lot more reading to do. But it's gonna help us solve the puzzles. Okay. King Aelesh. Okay, we heard about this guy before. All right. Sorry, I just worked out a bit because on my breaks, what I do now is I do my stretches because the hernia stuff, but I also work out a bit. Okay. Aelus took the throne in coronation ceremonies in the year 120 DE at the age of 170. Though it seems Aelish had never been a member of the Writers Guild on Gardner, he spent the first 50 years of his life with Rinaref after his own dismissal, working on the Book of Dunny. When the Dunny Writers Guild was formed in the year 8 DE, Rinaref made sure Aelish was placed in charge as the first Grand Master of the Guild. As Grand Master, he had worked closely with Rinaref in the writing of the new Guild of Writers' Oath. The Oath, which was what every member promised to live by, ended up staying in existence with a few minor changes until 9400 DE. Records indicate that Aelish modeled his life very closely to Rinaref's. He refused to build himself a palace until a common library was opened, as he strongly supported a place where all citizens could have access to books. Though there was some minor disagreement on minor issues, the building was eventually finished in 233 DE. Although like his mentor, Aelish still refused to build himself a palace. The reign of Aelish was extremely similar to that of Rinaref. There was still great excitement for the new ideals of the Laws of Dunny, and thus great support for Aelish, making his reign a very smooth one. Before his third son was born in 256 DE, records indicate that there was a bit of public apprehension over who the next king would be. Aelish's two elder sons were fairly rebellious, and neither seemed good candidates for the throne, at least in the public's opinion. However, Aelish's third son grew. It became apparent to the public, although records never gave specific reasons, that the boy closely followed his father's ideals. Aelish must have agreed with public opinion, as it was his third son who succeeded, as he selected to succeed him. Aelish died of natural causes at the age of 350. So was his third son, Shamat then? Sam's King Asimleth. King Asimleth took the throne in 5999 D at the age of 54. Asimleth inherited a people who were philosophically confused, the Watcher versus Gish, the Great King slash Tevar, but technologically advancing, many great construction, mining, and scientific inventions, expanding within the cavern at a great rate and moving toward diminishing the involvement of the outsiders within their culture, as well as fighting that had scarred their past was at a minimum. Asimov continued the peaceful trends by attempting to isolate no one, but instead began welcoming everyone and any beliefs they might have had. As it seems, he took no stance on any of the varying religious ideologies being passed around, and allowed any and all religious factions equal access to property, government, help, etc. While disregarding no beliefs, he was able to hold his own, some of which were unknown to Didani up to that point. Though never stated publicly by Asimlev, common opinion and historical records point towards numerous servants being used by Asimlev, most brought from outside ages, more so were the apparent challenges Asimlev held within these servants. Details are hard to find, but it seems as though these challenges range from hunts by Asimlev himself to gladiator-style battles between the servants. It should be noted that regardless of what actions occurred, there was little public outcry against them. Yes, Vector, this game does have a lot of reading. This is the most we've seen in the game, though. I'm in an area that apparently has a lot of books. Instead of philosophical or religious beliefs, Asimov instead focused on mining, expansion, and construction of the new districts, and offering equal opportunities of culture and social benefits to all classes. As far as outside involvement, Asimov publicly argued that the order from his father to all the guilds was not realistic, and that outside involvement would always be needed to some extent. Knowing the comment would anger some of the factions, he became the first king to publicly invite the more extreme factions, who wanted no outside involvement, to his palace for numerous talks on the issues. Though no decisions were made in the meetings themselves apparently calmed the factions and created a better overall feeling that the two could come to a decision in the future. Around the same time, two key writers from the Writers Guild left to join the Writers of Yavo. Up to that point, the group, who believed it was their duty to write the perfect age, had been relatively small. Like the Writers of Yavo, most of the popular factions or cults of the day focused on Yavo in one way or another. The old cults, such as the Tree and the Sacred Stone, had vanished for the most part, leaving way to disagreements in the beliefs of Yavo for the most part. Asimov passed away in 6284 DE at the age of 339, leaving the throne to his third and youngest son. From the line of Karath, written by Fall in 6985, worth mentioning as the Writers of Yao would eventually become one of the three largest sects in all of Dunny. After the Judgment Age, most of Dunny believed one would either end up in the Perfect Age or Jakuth's Age. Obviously, most wanted to live in Perfect Age, but were, of course, a variety of beliefs on how that was accomplished. So this is the reading portion of the game, I guess, where we read through all this lore drops about the kings and whatnot of Dunny. The family tree is tough to keep track of. Yeah, well, I know the Shamat became king around 350, I think, and they said that dude died around 350, so... King Najin? Damn. King Najin took the throne in 2356 DE at the age of 86. Najin did much to encourage the growth of the major guild of 5 artists, as well as seeking of the other truce. The year 2500 DE, 1,000 years after the death of the Great King, would mark the peak of what some would call the religious confusion. There were over 2,000 registered sects, and the original beliefs of Red RF were known by very few. Najin was clearly not one of them. It is 2397 DE that most officially marks the start of the Dunny Renaissance in that year. The Amos Theatre Company hosted the first play written by the playwright Sire. The play dealt with the Pento War and the Great King himself, and was one which Najin praised. It ended up being sold out for 3 straight weeks and marked not only the start of a theater as a popular entertainment source within the culture, but also the beginning of the Pento War subject, which would go on to become one of the most dealt with topics of their history and their art. In 2408 DE, the 33-year-old musician Siram began selling out concert halls, marking the beginning of yet another career of one of the great Dunny artists. His music dealt much within the Great King. That feels weird to say. Many times, ridiculing him, Najin praised his people for being able to express their true feelings in such wonderful displays of art. In 2488 DE, the first successful extrusion tests were carried out by the Guild of Miners, and to great applause from the public, Najin used the occasion to benefit everyone. He appointed the Guild of Miners as a major guild, replacing the Guild of 5 Artists. He then split the Guild of Fine Artists up into minor guilds of sculptors, artists, actors, and musicians. The split was to encourage growth in mining as well as the arts, 2 major causes of Najin. Throughout his reign, his proposal was strongly supported by Sire and Siram, as well as other artists who viewed it as an excellent opportunity for the growth of their respective fields. In 2500 DE, Najin proposed the construction of a new council chamber for the guilds. Somewhat surprising was that he suggested it should be built over the tomb of the Great King. The proposal was met with little opposition, and construction began 2 years later. In 2502 DE, the tomb of the Great King was barely visible, a tremendous symbol of what Dunny had become. Later, it was discovered that Within the council chamber was a massive vault protected by puzzles of a sort. The tomb had always been known for its patterns, some of which were claimed to have been prophetic messages. Nagin apparently became enamored with the patterns and spread them throughout the unseen portions of the chamber as well as the scene. Though the public knew very little of the vault at the time of construction, years later it was found to contain a tremendous amount of royal wealth, something Nagin often publicly encouraged. Of course, most were not able to save the amounts of Nagin did, but still the idea of saving one's money for future generations was strongly encouraged by him. Nagin died in 2533 DE at the age of 263, leaving the throne to his third son. In memorial to Nagin, Surrey wrote another of the more popular of his plays entitled Our Great King. It was the first play performed by the Minor Guild of Actors in 2535 DE. Taken from the Journal of Tavar in 3075, from a speech by Nagin christening the Minor Guild of Musicians. Though the official church registered a complaint, it seemed there was little heart behind it. Apparently, even a prophetess of Nagin supported the proposition. So what I'm getting here is that a lot of kings seem to leave the throne to their third son. That seems to be a common thing popping up here. The manhole. Marriage. Okay. Marriage. Much more than modern cultures, the Dunny culture, within Dunny cultures, all citizens were expected to marry. In fact, it was believed that marriage was an important part of a relationship with Yavo, as it taught and revealed necessary requirements for such a relationship. Both marriage relationships and the relationship with Yavo were described by some Dunny words toigon. Literally translated, the word means to love with the mind, and implied a deep understanding, respect, and most importantly, unselfish love for one another. Who is Dudes leaving his kingdom to? Technically speaking, that would be either one of my twin brothers or me. Obviously, the religious influence on most of the Dunny culture was very strong, and as a result, marriage was not something taken lightly. It was considered a lifetime commitment, and for a Dunny who could live to be 300 years old, it obviously was not a decision the Dunny felt should be rushed into, and it seemed as though it rarely was. Fight to the death. Some records point to rare arranged marriages, although for the most part it seems that the decision was up to the individuals. Marriage was not permitted before the age of 25, and marriage between blood relatives was strictly forbidden. Though allowed, marriage between classes was looked down upon. Marriage to other worlders was practically unheard of. I found certain writings from the 9000s going so far as to call the mixing of Dunny blood with outside cultures a travesty, while others wrote such a child who marries an outsider was better off dead. Oh. I don't think that's any different than being a travesty. The marriage ceremony itself was not a single day event, but one that took over 5 days. Attendance to those sections of the ceremony to which one was invited was extremely important, and it was considered a disgrace to be invited and not attend. The event usually began with a small ceremony held on the evening before the first day of the marriage ceremony. The ceremony always took place at the home of the groom, or his parents, and was meant to confirm both the bride and groom's decision to be united to one another in front of their immediate family. The groom presented his bride-to-be with a gift representing the confirmation of his choice. The acceptance of the gift by the bride-to-be was acknowledgement of her decision. Immediately after her acceptance of the gift, the bride-to-be was escorted away with her family and not to be seen by her groom until the joining ceremony that would take place on the 5th day. The first day was meant for the bride and groom to spend time with their families. As they were starting their own family, their old family would no longer be the highest priority. Thus, the day was set aside to spend time with that original family. Traditionally, that day ended with a large meal as well as speeches and blessings from the parents to the child. The way the writing looks on the line it hurts. The second day was set for the bride and groom to spend with friends, both married and unmarried. Traditionally, one of the friends would host a large dinner at the end of the day. The third day was reserved for spending time with the soon-to-be in-laws. It was the day that the bride and groom received blessings from their in-laws as well as the members of the family. Again, there was a traditional larger meal at the end of the day marked by speeches from the eventual in-laws and other soon-to-be family members. The fourth day was meant for the couple to spend time alone with Yavo individually. Though many apparently viewed the day as a formality, others viewed it as the most significant of all the days. The day was often filled with prayer, asking for Yavo's blessings upon the event as well, as a time to understand Yavo's desire for their new lives together. It was also considered a time to purify themselves before Yavo. Some chose to spend time with the priests or prophets, while others read the holy books and talked to Yavo himself. The fifth day was the day of joining. The early portion of the day was set aside for physical preparation, while the later part of the day was set aside for the joining ceremony itself. For those who did not have access to the private ages, the ceremony usually took place on marriage ages. For the upper classes, the ceremony took place in family ages. All family was expected to attend, as were fellow guild members. All of those in attendance were divided into two sides, one side representing the groom while the other represented the bride. Between the two sides in the center were a long aisle and triangular podium. The bride and groom would each approach their side of the podium by walking through their respective family and friends. It was after all those family and friends who had made the bride and groom what they were. And then he believed it was those family and friends who should present their bride or groom to their spouse. The priestess usually stood on the third side of the podium. As with most important events, especially marriage, the bride and groom wore the bracelets they had been given at birth as well as maturity. After the bride and groom arrived to the platform, the father of the bride would remove the bride's bracelets and give them to the groom. Then he believed that the giving of the bracelets represented the giving of the bride's purity and adulthood to the groom. A short speech followed the event. The father of the groom would follow the father of the bride with the identical procedure, giving his son to the bride. The giving of the children was followed by an expression of both parents of their blessings upon those joined, as well as those present. Symbolically, the bride and groom then switched sides to represent of an acceptance of all the bride's families and friends and the groom, and vice versa. Both the bride and groom handed all 4 bracelets to the priestess. While the priestess led the couple through their commitments to one another in Yavo, the bride and groom placed their hands upon the podium. During the commitments, the couple made promises to one another, followed by promises to Yavo. All were recited aloud to the priestess. The priestess would usually reminded the couple that marriage was a reminder of Tagan, to love with the mind, or to know with the mind, that their love should always be a representation of their love for Yavo. Following the commitments, the priest would place 2 new, larger bracelets upon the bride and groom. The groom's was placed upon the left wrist and the bride the right wrist. The new bracelets were meant to represent both purity and maturity, bracelets their spouses had previously worn. The Dunny emphasized that the spouse was now your responsibility to keep pure and knowledgeable of good and evil. The bracelets were meant to be a constant reminder of that responsibility, as well as commitment for maintaining the best for that spouse. After the new bracelets were placed upon the wrists, the hands of the bride and groom were wrapped together with a tight cord, covering the wrist and hands completely. Upon completion, the priest placed a ring upon the pinky of each freed hand. The rings were symbolic reminders of the entire ceremony and placed upon the 5th finger to represent the joining that took place on the 5th day. The priestess would usually remove herself from the podium so that the couple could take her place. Together, the couple then walked down the aisle between the 2 parties and toward the far end of the aisle, where a glass of wine waited for them. Before drinking, the couple knelt and prayed together to Yavo. After the prayer, each took a drink from the cup, and the 2 sides of the hall merged into one group, often with great celebration. They were now considered joined, and the celebration could begin. Families usually fed all in attendance, and where there was typically dancing and music. The couple was expected to keep their hands united throughout the night as a reminder that they are now joined in both the eyes of men and Yavo. The binding of the hands was apparently meant to be somewhat troublesome, symbolizing that there would be difficult times to the relationship, and that those times did not affect the fact that they were now joined. Following the celebration, tradition was for the couple to embrace and the priestess to touch a linking book to them so that they would both link to vacation or honeymoon type ages. Though these vacations were usually short, it was not unusual for the man to not work for up to a year in order to build the new marriage. I should also know that the cord used to join the couple's hands together was also viewed as a sacred item. It seemed as though various couples used the cord in a variety of different ways, some using them for necklaces and others hanging them in their house. Okay. Asin, when you had to go through the marriage ceremony, was it that complicated for you? Maturity. All right, here we go. Similar to a variety of other cultures, the Dunny celebrated a child's entrance into reason and maturity. This is why you're an incel? What? The Dani believed that the true maturity, or age of reason, as they called it, was achieved at the age of 25. Before that, the Dani believed the children's minds and hearts were not properly formed. Up until that time, they went so far as to say it was impossible for a child to truly make a correct decision as they were too easily controlled by their other motives. That did not mean that what they did was not right or wrong, but the Dani believed that Yavo did not hold them accountable for those decisions. Up to that point, it was apparently up to the parents to judge and protect, and thus other reasons society encouraged couples to have only one child at a time under 25. In the ceremonies of readiness, the Dani celebrated a child's entrance into reason and maturity. At the ceremony, the child was presented with a bracelet of knowledge, also translated maturity. I have to admit the translation is somewhat poor and makes it sound like a magical or superstitious item, something it did not sound like to them. In fact, it was a fairly serious item. The Dani viewed the bracelet as a sign of accountability. The individual, once given the bracelet, was expected to be responsible for his or her actions as she had true knowledge of good and evil and the wisdom to make the right choices between both. Associated with the bracelet were certain rights as well as expectations to behave in a more correct manner. From a religious standpoint, the ceremony of readiness signaled accountability to Yavo as well as fellow Dani citizens. No longer were parents judged for the actions of their children on a religious level, and no longer was lack of knowledge an excuse to Yavo. The maker, they believed, now expected much more of them. Though the age of reason was 25, the Dani did not consider true wisdom to come until much later. With not nearly the fanfare that the age of reason brought, at 125 years of age, there was another celebration for reaching the age of wisdom. Perhaps most importantly, regarding that status, the Dani were allowed to become highest ranks of teachers or leaders, grandmasters or lords. The same rules applies to women, and no woman under the age of 125 was technically allowed to advise, especially the kings. As well, it appears that a woman's fertility ended around age 125. During the time of kings, advisors required for those kings were under the age of 125, and as the king himself had not achieved the age of wisdom. The great king, Alcindor, was the only king who did not have an official advisor, even though he was under the age of wisdom for the majority of his reign. Oh. At least Piamet's old enough to advise. I don't know if you'd want that, but yeah. Pregnancy. Trisha. Okay. Pregnancy. Now that's surprising. I can't say for sure, but it seems fairly clear that Dani women were only fertile for one Dani day every 2 Dani months. In surface terms, that's roughly only 36 hours, or 30 hours every 72 days. Oh. If true, it explains quite a few things. First, why there were so few children for people who lived 300 years, and secondly, the reason behind the rather large celebrations of pregnancy. As far as I can tell, these celebrations were usually limited to family members, although were rather large. There was quite a bit of prayer to Yavo, as well as blessings from the family members. These blessings usually included vows to care for pregnant women and child through the coming months. Pretty great for prostitution. Oh no. As I mentioned in other areas, pregnant women were believed to be much more insightful and as a result, part of the pregnancy experience, although not part of the official ceremony, was using that insight to gain revelation from Yavo. There was quite a bit of religious meditation or meditation expected of women during this time. I won't go into it here. However, this meditation was expected to primarily guide the woman into her child's future, and its purpose was taken rather seriously. Next level prostitution, selling your fertile day. Yeah. While pregnancy within marriage was cause for great celebration, the same cannot be said of pregnancy outside of marriage. As far as one could tell, only women who became pregnant was expected to immediately marry, and any child conceived out of wedlock was unable to join a guild for its entire life. What is dry? As well, no revelation expected from such a mother. This was equivalent cursed to be to a lower class, as her child would not be able to attend a guild of the upper class. As far as I can see, gestation was a full year. 10 Dani months, 290 Dani days, equivalent to 1 Earth year. I have found no records of multiple births. You wonder if they get super horny on breeding day. If it's like becoming a werewolf, basically. That could be. Oh, that's it. That was a lot shorter than I thought it was going to be. All right. Class system. Sure. Class structure. Seems as though my first inclination towards class structure was incorrect. Though early on there was little in the ways of class society. Such a high ideal faded quickly. By 9400 DE, there were 7 very distinct classes. Elite, the lords and grand masters of the major guilds, it was possible for private citizens to be accepted, but if so, abundant resources were needed. It was only the elite who owned private libraries of books and the private islands. Quite a few obvious attempts to reach out and unify the classes, although I'm not sure it did much good. Common libraries, major guild scholarships, renovation of poorer districts, it all seemed more political than life-changing. Not surprising, I suppose. Guild members, yes, it was possible for lower classes to attend, but it seems by the end the schools were far too expensive and prestigious to allow for such. As a result, the graduates became a class among themselves, and a very high one at that. Upper class, the lowest of the three higher classes. Such citizens had succeeded in private enterprise and most likely provide the elite with their banks, pubs, etc. No major guild education for the most part, but enough money to buy their way into the upper classes. Middle class, mostly shop owners and the like, able to afford some luxuries of Dunny, but still considered far from the elite. Rare but possible for them to own books as well as private ages. Seemed to make up most of the minor guild enrollment. High poor. The higher class of poor seemed to be made of mostly industrial workers, many of whom spent their time on foreign ages, before it was outlawed, of course. It seemed that this class, along with the lower two, did not own books. Low poor. I can't seem to find a better name for them. However, it seems that these were that there were two classes of poor. These low poor were relegated to their own districts and rarely seen even with the middle class, and never with the upper classes. Possibly used as servants, although it was generally looked down upon. Sub low? Reference to the least, an undefined subclass, are found on rare occasions. Not enough data to elucidate. All right. Well, that is as they say that. What is this? Check this out. I know the DRC doesn't want us to touch these, but I bet Watson would like to know how these register with the doors too. It makes no sense. And then don't lose it. I could barely get it off the wall when I did. It was pretty scary, though the weirdest thing is that when I went back later, the cloth I got this place was intact again. Nick! Why did you do this? How do I interact with that? DRC. Oh, fuck. Alright. King Miemen took to the throne in 524 DE at the age of 83. One of the biggest announcements of Miemen's reign came rather quickly and was offered by the Guild of Miners and Stonemasons who had worked together. In 5307, they revealed Nara, as it had been created in a laboratory weeks earlier. Nara offered tremendous opportunities for mining construction and ended up having a massive impact on the future opportunities for Dunny. Even at the time of its release, there was apparently much excitement about its potential. You think you're low poor or sub poor? I probably would be sub poor. In 5312D, disease broke out in the industrial district of Dunny, most likely originating in the age of Yasifi. Not to be confused with Kafifi. The outbreak caused widespread panic as many predicted another plague similar to what had occurred during the 2100s. Fortunately, the illness was not nearly as lethal as the aforementioned, and the Guild of Healers reacted extraordinarily fast in finding a cure. Regardless, there was again a new push to at least separate the Nouvelle district away from the city proper. Miemen apparently liked the idea quite a bit and encouraged the surveyors to begin looking into such an expansion. In 5359 DE, sounds like COVID, the Dunny received another great reason for it to begin major expansion, and it came in the form of Stonetooth. It was the second of the Great Diggers and quite a bit more powerful and technologically advanced than the older Stone Eater. Miemen immediately ordered the Guild of Miners to begin clearing an area along with the Stone Eater for a new industrial district replacing Nuerl. It was not until 5475 that the actual construction was begun on the new industrial section Urin. Less than 100 years after the Stone Tooth, in 5473 DE, the Guild of Maintainers announced that the newly discovered Duretheni could be used to create much improved and much more protective maintainer suits. Though such an announcement may not seem especially important, the new suits ended up having a great impact on Dunny culture, since the maintainers were able to take bigger risks for the type of ages they could explore. The Guild of Writers were allowed to be a bit more liberal in their writing, and a new breed of age was begun. And this, I'm glad this is typed out. Reading this shit in bad handwriting would be awful. Yeah. During Miemen's reign, words became a common topic of discussion and attention was again given to the older temples. Evidence points to numerous remodels and renovations of many of the secular temples that had been built years earlier on the new line of Great Zero. It seems that Miemen himself had paid little attention to the religious pulse of his people, but being much more interested in technological advancements and city expansions to care. Once Miemen felt the Stone Eater and Stone Tooth were no longer needed, he recommended using them to build an underground tunnel connecting the island to the city proper and minimizing the need for boat travel. His proposition was not embraced by any means, especially the upper classes who were living on the island. Apparently, there were a number of protests for fear of the effect the tunnel could have on the island. The proposal was also rejected by most of the guilds, causing Miemen to not force it. You know what these fucking ages and books remind me of? The teleportals in Dragon Quest. In 5500 DE, the first imports from the ages were linked to the new Urin district. Haha, Tiamat lives there, much further from the city. Urin was said to be a tremendous improvement over the older New World, much more advanced, much safer. And there was a tremendous celebration on the day of its opening. Security was tight in the new district, and it was revealed later that the Relima had uncovered a variety of plots intended to display some of the factions' disagreements with the district. In 5540 DE, Miemen's only son became extremely ill and ended up passing away 6 months later. Oh, he caught COVID. As a member of the Guild of Healers, Asham was often among the first to investigate New Ages to make sure their safety in relation to disease. As a result of his death, the age was not approved until a cure could be found. Miemen considered the actions of his son heroic and changed the name of the Urin district to Ashemen a year after his death. It was said that the death left Miemen deeply saddened, devoid of the excitement he had shown throughout his reign. Many said it forced him to the prophetess Chisari. Miemen apparently spent much of his time with Chisari in his last days and was able to die a content man because of her. Miemen died in 5549 DE at the very ripe age of 392 and chose his nephew, probably on recommendation from Chisari, to succeed him. A metallic gray stone 30 times the density of steel and hardest of all the Dani stones. All you can think of is a Catboy character named King Meowman. Yastapi was mostly forest and provided Dani with a good portion of its woodly supply, including the expensive and rare Yema. King Yema. The industrial district was formed during the reign of Nidra and served as an importation center of most outside goods. So it's the area we're in right now. Would that be Ashemen then? Because it kind of looks like an industrial area. The newer ages allowed for much more experimentation with atmospheres, animal life, and energy sources. From the Journal of Grandmaster Veshar, the Guild of Stone Manners, from the journals of the prophetess Chisari assigned to King Miemen. It should be noted that the prophetess had been assigned to all of the kings, but for the most part had become nothing more than figureheads rarely consulted. From Eshem, written by Ramina in 5589. Alright, we have 2 books left, I think. No, we have 1 book left and a couple notes, it looks like. King Karath took the throne in 6731 DE at the age of 54. Karath is probably the most well-known name of all the kings, not because he was necessarily considered the best, but because he was the last. His name came to represent all of the kings in the later years, including the renaming of the Arch of Kings to the Arch of Karath. His mother had raised him to follow the teachings of Gish, and by the time he took the throne, he was believed to be a wholehearted believer in the followers. Because of that, and the experience of watching his father interact with his advisors, Karath had decided from an early age that a king was no longer the correct way the Dani should be led. At least, he argued, not until the true great king would come. The fact that Karath, in a single reign, was able to convince his people that the way they had been ruled for thousands of years was wrong and should be changed, should be considered nothing short of miraculous. Karath carefully crafted his arguments as a benefit for the guilds more than anything else. After all, he argued, Dani is the guilds, let us be protected by their fortress and be ruled by their wisdom. It was hard for the guilds not to support a proposal that removed the king from the highest authority and replaced him with 5 lords that would be automatically chosen from the Grand Masters of the guild. It gave all the power of Dani to the guilds, and there were only a few Grand Masters who seemed to disagree. Those few were known as faithful followers of the Great King and Rinaref, who had always supported the role of kings. The one true king will come. I feel like kings would have a lot of concubines at the breeding cycles. Yeah, but the cycle, the so as we found out though, any kid born out of wedlock was ostracized. So I imagine he probably did for that reason. I mean, if they were like Rinaref, some of the other kings probably did, as they probably just didn't give a fuck. Fortunately, for Karath, though his people believed a variety of different philosophical ideologies, only those who faithfully followed the original teaching of Rinaraf and the Great King were distributed at the thought of no king. Or disturbed at the thought of no king. And it was the majority of Dunny who no longer followed those beliefs, but instead those of Nemea, Gish, the Watcher, and various others. As a result, it was a cultural impact that the public had to overcome, and not a religious one. Karath attempted to further please the guilds, recommended new renovations and additions to the council chamber, and construction of a new guild hall, meant to celebrate the new power that would be theirs, a symbol of the power of the guilds and lords, and further insult to the Great King, burying his memory even further under government construction. It's super weird. But yeah, for that reason, they gave too many fucks. Yeah, of that sort, yep. Construction began in 6970 DE on the new guild hall. There was no better symbol of the attitude of the Dunny in 6970 DE. The tomb of the Great Kings was further buried under massive buildings dedicated to the government and the guilds. By the end of his reign, Karath had convinced a majority of Dunny of his own beliefs. Most claimed to be followers of Gish and his writings. If not now, then soon. Karath often said. After his death, Karath's words would be proven true with the onset of the Metis War. Outside factions invaded both attempts to destroy the ink-making and book-making guilds, and almost succeeded. By the time the war would end, there would be few left who did not follow Gish, and thus believe in the end of the most outsider involvement. The discovery that conservative factions had led to start of the Metis War would come much later, when it was far too late to alter the conservative trends. Regardless, in 6977 DE, Karath indicated the throne and abdicated the throne and gave the order to over the power of the kings to the first 5 lords of Dunny history. They were Lord Terry of the Guild of Messengers, Lord Hemela of the Guild of Healers, Lord Molleth of the Guild of Caterers, Lord Kedri of the Guild of Writers, and Lord Karenin of the Guild of Analysts. Karath died 8 years later. The time of kings was over, taken from Karath's public speech in which he first proposed the idea. From the First Love, written by Tarvis in 7000. So, do you think back when, before technology was a thing and people could, like, snap pictures of their own, if someone wanted to send a dick pic, they had to hire an artist to come in, draw up a rendition, and then they sent that to someone? Where the heck is my book? And why did someone take it in the first place? Nick, why are you here? Matthew, the last bunch of papers you sent were very interesting. Since you did such a good job, I've got another list I'd like you to divvy up to the team. How you do is up to you. 1. I'd like some more information on family life, ceremonies, etc. Anything related to birth, marriage, cultural events. I know we have quite a bit of source material for this, so anything you get would be helpful. I think we've gathered quite a bit on science and technology, but not enough on the personal lives of these people. We have quite a bit of guild information, but gathering that up into one tidy area would be nice. The fall is still an obvious area where we are lacking. I'm not sure I can help you with research material, but given the latest information we're getting, at some time we're going to have to dig into this. I recommend assigning someone the sole task of the fall. Continue with the kings. A short synopsis of all the kings would be helpful following the form you started with the last batch. We still have religious writings, but we need to translate. These are going to be the most difficult, but I think they can give us a large amount of helpful information. We have a lack of journals from various Dunny residents, etc., not to mention ages. I think that will be more than enough for now. Again, thank you for your team, for all they're doing, and tell them they're doing great work. Dr. Watson. He made a mold of it. That's how dildos were invented. Oh no. Alright. Unfortunately, that's got to be it. I know the last little bit of stream here was a lot of reading and a lot of listening to me speak. But, you know, that's pretty normal for my stream, I guess, is listening to me speak, I think. Yeah, so I kind of think that this might be the Amani district, because it's kind of industrial looking. But then again, that could be the great tree of Yavo that they said was buried under everything. Either way, this is where we gotta end. Writing's actually really good. Yeah, I enjoyed reading that. We learned a lot. Lore is a good thing, so we're gonna teleport back to home base for now. And this is where we gotta end, because I gotta call. Make some phone calls before 5. So, guys, if you liked what you saw and you're not following, I do encourage you to give a follow. YouTube, thank you very much for joining me. I know this one probably wasn't the most exciting thing I've ever played, but at the same time, it's a lot more enjoyable than I worried it would be. So, you want all those books voiced by Keith David? Well, I'll see what we can do. But yeah, YouTube, thank you for viewing.